Hi guys, my name's Seb Tudor, I'm the man on the Silver Mountain and welcome back. Now today I want to talk about another aspect of managing expectations, which we talked about yesterday. If you haven't seen it, just jump to the channel page and should be like one of the top couple of videos there. Uh, this is a kind of discussion that I've been part of a few times and I'm still kind of dipping back and forth between. I've got a fairly good idea, but obviously every single time I have a different viewpoint thrown at me, maybe just sways me a little bit. So I'm interested to see what you guys think about this as well. But this is the discussion between whether or not realistic expectations are really just lowered expectations, or vice versa. Now let's talk around this a little more, because obviously yesterday we were talking about expectations and managing them and the three things that you can do to make sure that they don't kind of spiral out of control and don't get communicated properly and all that kind of thing. And the thing that stands out when I'm talking to people about this is usually that they go, right, well, I've got these expectations of what my partner should be doing at the moment, or the way that we communicate, or the kind of guy that I want to meet, or the kind of girl that I want to meet. And yet when we're talking about this, it always seems like I have to lower my expectations for them to be realistic. But is that the case? And it's a case of going, well, what are your current expectations? Because I talked about this when we talked about online dating a while ago. And that is that you get a lot of people on online dating sites who want to meet Mr. Perfect or Mrs. Perfect, or hopefully to be Mrs. Perfect, I guess. And as a result, it's one of those things where they have this idea in their head of kind of what they want, but they're not willing to be realistic about it. You know, they have this list of very vague things that they only really specify once that person is sat in front of them. You know, they only become specifics when they've already judged if they want that person or not. And as a result, you know, when we're talking about expectations, and where yesterday I said, you know, you can't expect anyone to be perfect, you can't expect perfection in anything. You can kind of go with what's pretty much ideal, but not perfect. It's always going to have something wrong with it, something that doesn't live up to what you want. And so, yeah, in that respect, these expectations that you have, if you want to make them realistic, they should, in theory, or they may very well, in theory, be lowered expectations. But at the same time, not necessarily, because it all depends on how you frame those expectations to begin with. For instance, someone could say, I'm looking for a partner who is tall. Let's say me, for instance. I'm looking for a curvy, attractive blonde. Yeah? In which case, going and looking at that, those are some very nebulous terms that I've just thrown out there. Curvy, well, do I mean very curvy? Do I mean slightly curvy? Do I mean, you know, tall and curvy, short and curvy? What am I talking about? When I'm saying blonde, well, fine, that's a fairly straightforward one, but again, there could still very well be too blonde and not blonde enough, but I've just thrown out a random word there, and that's just my expectation of what I want to find. And then in regards to attractive, that's entirely subjective and means nothing to anyone other than me. In which case, though, let's then expand that idea into what you would find on your normal online dating profile. So I want those three things, fine, but they also need to be self-sufficient, ambitious, they need to be funny, they need to appreciate video games, and they need to appreciate international film, and they need to be well read, and you know, like beards, all that kind of stuff. And I could continue to spin that out and throw that out for miles. I could literally create my perfect woman in text. Excuse me. But in doing so, how likely am I going to get all of those things in one place at one time? Depending on how much depth I go into, probably not all that likely. If though we look at just those three that I threw in to begin with, blonde, curvy, attractive, You might find that, but then does that mean my expectation for what that person will be like is going to match up with who that person is? Chances are probably not, because you've never met that person before. You're interacting with them based purely on the appearances that I have just thrown out there. And attractiveness could cover more than just the appearance aspects that I put in there, but in which case it's such a broad thing. Now let's look at the wider profile, where we were talking about what they like, what they want, how they act, being ambitious and so on. In which case, then we look at that and it's like, well, fine, they might be ambitious, but what if they're too ambitious? What if they're ambitious about a thing or in a way that doesn't add up with what I want? You know, all of these things suddenly become pretty evident that they were unrealistic. Yeah? Just in the way that we've put them, just in the way that we've said them to ourselves, or the way that we've written them out for other people. In which case, you know, the first thing in this lowered versus realistic expectations discussion that I always try to get across and always try to talk around is, well, how specific are these expectations going to be? How subjective are they going to be? How objective are they going to be? What are we going to be tangling with? Because if they're entirely subjective, then they're probably not going to be realistic in the first place. If they're objective, fine, but then what is the likelihood of us having all those things that we've specified in one place at one time? In which case, which is more important? You know, what things that we've listed there, what criteria, what expectations, what things we want are the things that we have to have relative to the things that we kind of want but don't need, you know? In which case, when it comes to it, I don't think realistic expectations have to be the same as lowered expectations. But at the same time, I feel like they're only not the same thing if you've got a realistic view of the world to begin with. And that's, I think, where this discussion starts, because you've got a lot of people out there, as we were saying yesterday, who have either this very demanding attitude towards something like an online dating service, because they have that expectation of, well, I've paid and I've put my stuff in and I've filled out the survey, the personality profile, and I've put up pictures of myself and I've done everything that it says in its like 10-step guide to joining our website, and I've been on here for a month and still not found anyone that even comes close to what I want. You know, that's kind of unrealistic and very demanding, somewhat entitled. But then also, as we were saying yesterday, there is this very kind of large focus in the world on your kind of fairy tale romances being the way that relationships work. And this is propagated in rom-coms and other films as well, and stories, and people, you know, we idolize the people who have these fairy tale romances, which is why then it's so surprising when you've got these supposedly very happy celebrities who don't want for anything and who are barely have to work and all the rest of it, who have had their lives kind of recorded by the press or on reality TV shows, stuff like that, and then we see them get divorced, we see their relationships break down. There's no, there's usually a kickback from fans or a lot of confusion around it, and it's a case of going, well, yeah, because relationships, even if they seem fairy tale, there's a good chance that them being that kind of whimsical fairy tale, overly romantic relationship has caused it to crumble, caused it to break down over time. You know, it's not something that aids in the maintaining of a relationship, and it definitely doesn't help with the managing of expectations and kind of leveraging of stuff. So, you know, it's a case of going, if you've got that realistic view, then your expectations can be realistic rather than lowered. If you've got that kind of highly unrealistic view where you're expecting Prince Charming to turn up, or the beautiful Disney princess to appear for you, and I realise I'm using an awful lot of Disney analogies and things here, but not intentional. But it's like, if you haven't got your expectations, your view of the world, what you want grounded in reality in the first place, then there's a good chance that you're probably going to end up having to lower those expectations to make them realistic, just because your head was in the clouds in the first place, and you can't really get much higher than that. So, those are my thoughts, guys. But also, as said, there's always different opinions on this. There are people like me who are going, well, yeah, well, if it's objective, or if you've got a good grasp on where kind of reality is and where its limits are, then you're probably going to be fine, because you're not going to be lowering your expectations. You're going to be working within the real world. But there are other people who are like, no, it can be, I can be completely realistic, but then to make my expectations of what I want realistic, I've got to limit them. And also there's the flip side of it, of what if you're being realistic but the other person is expecting too much, and it becomes a bit of a weird contrast, and it can still work. I've dealt with relationships, I've talked with people, I've coached people around relationships that one person wanted the fairy tale romance, the other person just wanted the happy time, and happy just intimate time with another person that they cared about. And it worked out because one person was able to cater to the other, and in return they got what they wanted, and so it all worked out. But again, that has been rarer, and it requires usually a lot more groundwork as well. So there's that. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear your experiences, guys, because again, this is something that just, it's such a fascinating conversation to have, and I could talk about this for so long, even though this is probably going to be a shorter video because I've just kind of summed it up. There are so many facets and what ifs and differences that people can bring in from their own experiences, their own relationships, their own preferences, their own expectations, the things that they want, to sway this realism versus lowering kind of discussion around expectations in relationships generally, and especially expectations of kind of the person you want to get with before you've even actually got with them. So, as said, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear your experiences. I'd love to hear your take on this. It's one of these questions that I love kind of throwing out there and kind of having a talk around with people. But anyway, guys, I hope you found this interesting. And otherwise, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the video later. Take care. Thank you very much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video or found it interesting, then please drop us a like, share this video, and subscribe for more. And I'll see you in the video later. Take care.